Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we re-diving into one of the most pivotal and brutal conflicts in human history, the Battle of Stalingrad. This wasn't just a battle. It was a turning point of the Second World War, a clash of titans on the Eastern Front that would ultimately seal the fate of the Third Reich. So, grab a seat, and let us journey back to the war-torn streets of a city that became a symbol of incredible resilience and immense suffering. Our story begins in the summer of 1942. After the initial shock of Operation Barbarossa the previous year, the German war machine was once again on the offensive. Hitler, obsessed with both the strategic and symbolic value of the city bearing Stalin's name, diverted his forces. His plan, codenamed Case Blue, aimed to secure the oil fields of the Caucasus, and capturing Stalingrad was a crucial step to protect the German army's northern flank. The city itself was a major industrial hub, sprawling along the western bank of the mighty Volga River. Taking it would not only cripple Soviet production, but also deliver a massive propaganda victory. In late August, the German Sixth Army, under the command of General Friedrich Paulus, reached the outskirts of Stalingrad. What followed was one of the most intense bombing campaigns of the war. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, flew thousands of sorties, dropping incendiary and high-explosive bombs that turned the city into a sea of fire. Over 40,000 civilians perished in the first week alone. The city was reduced to a skeleton of rubble and twisted metal. But this destruction, ironically, created the perfect urban battlefield for the defenders. The mountains of debris, collapsed buildings, and cratered streets became a fortress, a nightmare for the advancing German tanks and infantry. The Soviet 62nd Army, led by the indomitable General Vasily Zhukov, was tasked with the seemingly impossible: hold the city at all costs. Zhukov famously said, "There is no land for us beyond the Volga." This phrase became the rallying cry for every soldier, every factory worker, and every citizen who took up arms. They understood that retreat was not an option. The battle devolved into a brutal, close-quarters struggle. It wasn't a war of grand maneuvers, but of desperate fights for every building, every floor, every room. This was the era of the Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. Imagine fighting not just street by street, but room by room. A staircase could be a front line. A single apartment building, like the famous Pavlov's house, could be defended by a handful of men for months against relentless assaults. Snipers became legendary figures in this urban hellscape. Vasily Zaitsev, a name many of you might recognize, became a symbol of Soviet resistance, his deadly accuracy a constant threat to German officers and soldiers. Every pile of rubble could hide a machine gun nest, every sewer tunnel a path for a surprise attack. Life expectancy for a new soldier arriving in the city could be measured in hours. The fighting was savage, personal, and unrelenting. While Zhukov's men clung desperately to a shrinking sliver of land along the Volga, the Soviet High Command, or Stavka, was preparing a masterstroke. Under the watchful eye of General Georgy Zhukov, they were secretly amassing enormous reserves on the flanks of the German salient, far to the north and south of the city. The German intelligence, focused entirely on the meat grinder within Stalingrad, completely missed this massive buildup. The German flanks were dangerously overstretched and held by weaker Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian allied armies, who were ill-equipped for the harsh Russian winter. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets unleashed Operation Uranus. Like a giant pair of pincers, two massive Soviet fronts smashed through the weak Axis flanks. The Romanian armies collapsed almost immediately. The speed and ferocity of the Soviet counteroffensive were stunning. Within just 4 days, the two pincers met at the town of Kalach, about 70 kilometers west of Stalingrad. The trap was sprung. The entire German Sixth Army, along with parts of the 4th Panzer Army, nearly 300,000 men, was completely encircled. General Paulus, realizing his dire situation, requested permission from Hitler to attempt a breakout. Hitler, in a fit of rage and delusion, flatly refused. He designated Stalingrad a fortress and ordered the Sixth Army to stand and fight, promising they would be supplied by air. This promise proved to be a fatal fantasy. The Luftwaffe was exhausted and lacked the transport capacity to supply such a large force. The encircled army needed hundreds of tons of supplies per day. On a good day, the airlift brought in a fraction of that. As winter tightened its icy grip, the situation for the trapped German soldiers became a living nightmare. Food ran out, ammunition dwindled, medical supplies disappeared. Frostbite and disease became as deadly as Soviet bullets. The men were starving, freezing, and losing all hope, trapped in a frozen wasteland far from home. Their once mighty army was being systematically starved into submission. In December, the Germans launched a desperate relief attempt, Operation Winterstorm, led by Field Marshal Erich von Manstein. His panzer divisions fought their way to within 50 kilometers of the pocket, a tantalizingly short distance. Paulus was once again urged to break out and link up with the relief force. But bound by Hitler's direct orders, he hesitated. The window of opportunity slammed shut as Soviet reinforcements arrived, pushing Manstein's forces back. The last glimmer of hope for the Sixth Army was extinguished. The end came slowly and agonizingly. By January 1943, the Soviets launched their final offensive, Operation Ring, to liquidate the pocket. They sliced the German-held territory into smaller and smaller pieces. The suffering was unimaginable. On January 31st, Field Marshal Paulus, whom Hitler had promoted just a day earlier in a cynical attempt to ensure he wouldn't surrender, was captured in the basement of a department store. A few days later, on February 2nd, 1943, the last remnants of the Sixth Army laid down their arms. Of the nearly 300,000 men trapped in the Stalingrad pocket, only about 91,000 survived to become prisoners of war. Of those, due to the brutal conditions of the forced marches and camps that followed, fewer than 6,000 would ever see Germany again. The total casualties for the battle, including civilians, are estimated to be close to 2 million, making it one of the bloodiest battles in the history of warfare. The victory at Stalingrad was more than just a military triumph for the Soviet Union. It was a massive psychological blow to the Axis powers. The myth of German invincibility was shattered forever. From this point on, the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front passed to the Red Army, which would begin the long, hard push that would eventually end in Berlin. Stalingrad became a powerful symbol of courage and sacrifice for the Allies and a name synonymous with catastrophic defeat for Germany. It fundamentally changed the course of World War II and, by extension, the course of the 20th century. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Battle of Stalingrad. It's a somber but incredibly important piece of our shared history. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more content. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, take care.